Overtriggers, love it or hate it, it's gonna be a mechanic is gonna stick with us for quite a while because, you know, the being quite recent format. But I do want to think which one annoy me more so than the others. So essentially this is just a tier list of scaling which overtrigger is the most broken in terms of the additional effect rather than what the base overtrigger already do.
No, he's got a point.
Also, this is purely on my opinion and I'm entitled to my opinion and you guys do entitled to yours. If you guys have different opinion on certain overtriggers, do leave down in the comments because I want to see how much certain overtriggers annoy you more so than the others. If you guys enjoy this kind of content, consider like, share and subscribe to this channel and, you know, ring that bell to keep up with all the notification. And without further ado, let's start off with the classics, the crit elemental overtriggers. Oh, by the way, just to make things clear, I'm going to be covering all the unique overtriggers only, so the one with the unique effect, because we have quite a number of duplicates effects. So this is just gonna be a representative of each trigger of that types. So yeah, starting off with the clear metal overtrigger. So for those who don't know what it does, additional effect is just add another 100 million to the under. And this is, I would say, a very solid overtrigger, a very middle of the road overtrigger. The main reason behind I'm putting it at B is because a lot of decks are capable of using it quite well because of the fact that a lot of deck has a capability of multiple attack as right now, and some of the decks are actually utilize the 100 million K better than the others. And that's purely the reason why I wanted to put him in the middle, because this is exactly what I think they are looking for, a very powerful overtrigger that doesn't flip the game way too much. I can't really say the same with some of the other entry in this list, but I think OPD Tyrandia, or just like a very generic overtrigger everyone can find, it's just right in the mid, smack right in the middle of brokenness. Then we move on to the Dragon Empire overtrigger. For those who don't know, this essentially just restun your Vanguard and allow them to attack again with little to no cost or demerit. So this to me is an A tier for a few reasons. For one, defensive wise, it's a very powerful overtrigger because once you activate it, it essentially allow you to draw 5 cards, 4 from the drive checks and 1 from overtrigger's effect itself. And if your Vanguard can do multiple drive, that's even make things more nuts.
Of course!
But the only reason why the only reason I want to put it higher than the generic one is because the Vanguard restand is by far one of the most important aspect of a lot of Vanguard gameplay, because that additional drive check can actually flip the game very quickly. Even the only problem come with this card is that it does tied to luck, and I'm not exactly want to judge this overtrigger based on luck because, you know, it is already broken as it is. So yeah, I think it is not the strongest overtrigger we have seen, but it is definitely one of the stronger one. Next up we have Gamma Gale and all Dark States overtriggers, and this is a hard one because for those who don't know what it does is it's a overtrigger that gives your Vanguard additional 10k and a crit for the rest of the game. And personally for me, as someone who is the Dark State nuts, I gotta say it is one of the more underwhelming overtrigger.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
More so than this one. And here's the reason why. This overtrigger requires you to pull it early. And as we know, we don't drive check that early in the game, which means that situation where you're gonna drive check the overtrigger and get that extra crit and power for the rest of this game is pretty slim at the start of the game. It is still a powerful trigger, being just another Vanguard only critical trigger, so it is still one of the more offensive based trigger. But the problem is that it is quite inflexible to use. Like compared to the other overtrigger in this list, it is definitely on one of the weaker side. The only reason why a lot of Darkseid players do still go for this overtrigger is mainly because of the fact that a lot of Darkseid units actually gain benefit from these particular additional effects, or like the way they design it. So because of that, I feel that by the basis is not a good overtrigger, but it make it better because of how many of the Darkseid Vanguard kind of works mechanically. Next up we have the Keter, the Almatono or something like that. And this one I'm gonna put in A tier as well. Around the same tier, I think I will put it behind the Dragon, the Dragon Empire one, mainly due to the fact that this card is very powerful if you have a deck that it consists of grade 3 Bastion. And because of that, this card has its value decreased depends on what is on your record on the field. And in the recent Keter right lines, they seem to have a heavier focus on lower grades, superior calling like Tegria, Duisburg, and even Majestic Lord Blaster. So there are definitely decks that can make a full advantage of these overtriggered effects, but it is still a strong overtrigger nonetheless. It's just that it does have, how to put it, it is better in the sense that it can lead into better combos, but as a base, I do think it's weaker than the Vanguard double swing. Cause like the Vanguard double swing, you have a bit more linear of like delegating the power to Rearguard and Vanguard, depends on how the situation goes, but the Keter one has a bit lesser chance unless you make sure that your deck kind of builds with the consideration of, with a light consideration of triggering the overtrigger. A good example for that is of course Hexa-Orb and maybe Bastion with just swing with multiple grade 3s with Twin Drive. And next up we have Vanguard, and I think this is very obvious. It's an S tier of course. I mean, this stupid overtrigger, for those who don't know, is essentially double power and critical. By the way, you add 100 million K to your unit first before that additional effect trigger. So that means that this triggers doubles the power of whatever you're giving to. So essentially one unit will get 200 million K, which is very stupid. But what makes this card even more stupid is its compatibility with multiples of the deck that essentially just gain more crits. Like Eva has Obscure, which gain additional crit, double it, you get 4 crits. Gravidia, which essentially double the trigger effects, making it the one-hit kill deck. And I think this is one of the reasons why Gravidia is such a powerful deck in the meta, because of the fact that it have these stupid overtriggers. And if you compare it to other overtrigger in this list, I do feel that it doesn't have as much of an effect, more so than this card, even if some of the overtrigger has the different additional effect. And because of that, it's gonna be in S tier. Next up we have Stoicheia, and personally for me, this might surprise some of you guys, but I think this is actually a pretty good overtrigger. The thing about this card is that it is a rainbow trigger, so front trigger activate, critical trigger activate, draw trigger activate, and also overtrigger itself. So as its own, this is a +2 by itself, and plus additional 10k to the front row and give a crit and a power as well is actually quite a good thing, even if it's not as effective as unit like the Vanguard overtriggers or the Amatono. That's why the dragon is not in the A tier. Actually, yeah, I'll put it this way, it is like in between A and B tier, like it's at the bottom of it. And the thing is that in Stoicheia now, there are more decks that can do multiple attack, and that means that there are decks that can take advantage of this additional effect even better than some of the decks. And for most part, Stoicheia is just very strong when it comes to technicality already. This is just boosted much further, and that's why I wanted to, it doesn't feel right putting that to be on the same level as the generic overtrigger. So that's why I'm shifting it to A tier. Okay, next up is really cool, and this one this one might be surprising for some of you guys, but I consider this to be in the same level as the Stoicheia, but I can see it to be on the same tier as this generic overtrigger, mainly the fact that, for those who don't know, what it does is for the rest of the game, all your Rearguard plus 10k. And this is actually very strong. It makes the deck that does rely on the deck that has multi-attack available a lot more scarier, and it does make some of the more prevalent deck that is in the game right now even more scary. The only problem I would say with it is that the reason why I don't rank it higher is because of the fact that not all the deck can take advantage of it. I think only like half of the really cold right line, and that's a lot of them, can take advantage of this, while the other half really can't. And that is a kind of a bit of a problem because of the fact that really cold gets so many right line in a short period of time is actually weighting down the Overtrigger because of the fact that many of them they can utilize it quite well, especially thanks to Yuiga being in the picture as well. But there are a good number of them cannot take it to the full use, and because of that, I can't really see it being higher. I mean, okay, like I said, these are interchangeable. Like if there is an A- tier, this dragon and this dragon and this the recall Overtrigger will be right in that tier. But I feel like it would be very weird to put it there, so B tier it is. And next up we have Monster Strike Overtrigger, and there are 3 of them. So and these are all unique. That's why I am willing to put it into the separate list in itself. First we have Lucifer, which we can only activate one of the additional effects. One is for the rest of this turn, all your Vanguard gain 10k. And another trigger effect is heal it. Oh, I almost forgot. This also heal. So
failing on the highest level.
No.
Lucifer, in my opinion, this is where I would consider it to be in the B tier. Like, okay, the thing about Monster Strike is that depend on which Monster Strike deck you go, and there are quite a number of them, you are definitely going to try this. You are definitely making a heavy choice on this as well, depend on what deck you are up against. Plus, all Vanguard's 10k for one turn, it's just not strong enough of an effect, at least in my opinion. And compared to some of the other Overtrigger that the nation does have, I do feel that Lucifer is definitely on a weaker side of life. I mean, what is the strongest form of Lucifer in my opinion is the new grade one that they gave her in the Monster Strike Volume 2. Her Overtrigger form is just not the best iteration, at least in my opinion. Next up, we have Arthur, which has 2 effects: retire all opponent rear guards and +1 crit to one of the rear guards. And this is not a bad Overtrigger. Like, retire rear guards without targeting it is quite a big deal, especially in against some of the decks. But if you ask me, it's still in the B tier, but like I would rank it higher than the generic one because the retire has more use. Is more so than one. If your opponent is the deck that rely on the field presence, and there's a good number of them, then this is a very good counter, and the targetable crit is useful in certain Monster Strike like right line as well. So nothing much. I think like the problem with Monster Strike, in my honest opinion, is the fact that all of them has a Sophie choice style of Overtrigger. You can only choose one of the powerful effects that exists, and because of that, I feel like sometimes you rather just combine all the effects together, like all the main nation Overtriggers, rather than just split it into 2 like Monster Strike. Okay, next up we have Key Skill Raila, which is from the second booster, and the 2 additional effects is actually very strong. This is where I would say they actually make improve on the Sophie Choice Overtrigger effect, because one of the additional effect is you heal until you have the same damage as your opponent, and this is additional effect by the way. And then the other effect is call 1 card from the drop zone to Vanguard Circle and +10k, making additional attacks. And with all that considered, I would say this is the best Monster Strike Overtrigger so far. Okay, I think with how many Overtrigger populate B tier, I'll put the really call on the A tier. I mean, ability to just re-heal your advantage board is very good, but the problem also relies on how lucky your opponent sack as well. And this is where its first ability does have kind of the restriction, but its second one is actually very useful, making it allow you to essentially dish 1 more attack, or just call a very powerful back row to just swing multiple times. And Monster Strike, there are quite a number of decks that does rely on this effect better, but I do feel some of the more stronger one can take advantage of this very well as well, and that's why I'm putting it at the top of B tier and push the recall to A tier, because I think the main nations Overtrigger are some of the strongest, like except for this lah. This one a bit too underwhelming. Okay, next up we have Recall Ragnarok Overtrigger, and they are essentially the same thing, but they are 2 different things in the sense that depend on which right line you go for human or Valkyrie, then you need to pick this one I believe, and the other one is for God solely. So the 2 and 3 will be in the same spot, And this additional effect is plus 10k to the front row unit and restand a rear guard with a specific race that I already mentioned, God of Human Valkyrie or God. So with all that considered, the fact that it does give you additional attack, I'm gonna put it in the same realm as his skill. Turning it into a front trigger and a stand trigger is not a terrible overtrigger, but I feel like the higher up overtrigger can have more effects for it. Of course, you can just restand rear guard and plus to that particular rear guard and restand as well. I'm not too sure whether is there a rear guard restrict in Ragnarok or not. If there is, do leave in the comments. Cause if there is, then things change a bit and I will push it up to maybe like high B tier. But because I'm not too sure on that, I will leave it in the high B tier right now. Low A tier. I'll push it to low A tier if there's a good number of units that can guard restrict. But for now, I will put it in the high B tier lah. Okay, next up we have Shaman King. This one is very interesting because its additional effect is just straight up deal 1 damage, and it's also an order that allowed to retire the whole field as well. So these two are a little bit special because they are not the unit, they are over trigger order,
which is nice and all.
And considering how strong some of the Shaman King deck can be, I'm gonna rank this in A tier. Okay, you know what? S tier look a bit lonely, so I'm just gonna put this in S tier. It's okay. Ability to just deal 1 damage straight up without any restriction is actually insane. This means that if you are in like a clutch, if you are in like a climax part of the game where your damage is really matters, ability to just dish out 1 damage straight up is actually really scary. And the worst part of this Shaman King Overtrigger is the fact that this deal damage regardless of how many damage you are at. So that means that if your opponent have 5 damage and you trigger this Overtrigger, if they don't get a heal, it's a guaranteed win. That's the reason why Shaman King is being known for one of the more well-known deck, especially your deck, because of the fact that it has a crit pressure, restand pressure, and this stupid Overtrigger crit this deal damage Overtrigger as well. So I think in terms of how well the Shaman King deck utilize this Overtrigger, I mean the bar is low lah, but a lot of decks utilize it very well. And last but not least, well, technically definitely the least, Token Ranbu order, and it is an order that does give Aurega 10k and additional crit, I believe, and its additional to Overtrigger effect is just plus 1 crit to every unit on the field. And I'm gonna put this, for some of you guys might be surprised by this, but I'm gonna put this on high B. Okay, here's the thing. Ability to just give crit to all regard is actually scarier than you think it is, because one more thing that you need to take note is the fact that, okay, this I'm not too sure on the ruling itself, but it kind of depends on, okay, I think I'll put it like, yeah, I'll put it here. So here's the thing about this Overtrigger effect. If the additional effect cannot be countered by the crit counter, then this is a very powerful Overtrigger because, you know, it's a part of the trigger effects. But if it is, then the pressure you have is a little bit lacking because all you get is a critical, and Token Ranbu is one of those collab decks that just got released back in the earlier parts of Overdress. So right at the moment, so right now the Token Ranbu second wave is not here yet, but at the moment it is very underwhelming. But if there's a unit that can gain a lot of power in Token Ranbu coming up in the upcoming booster, I can see it being very powerful. And yeah, that's pretty much about this tier list. I surprised myself that I'm judging Darkseid quite harsh, but as someone who has played Darkseid for the longest time, I mean, it's my main nation, I can heavily say and criticize this particular Overtrigger for the fact that it is very underwhelming compared to any of these things on the field. The fact that it despite have the entire game clause, the fact that it is weaker than the Sophie choice Overtrigger says something lah. Because Overtrigger needs to be game ending, at least in my opinion. But what do you guys think? Well, if you guys already here, I hope you watched throughout the whole video, or there are some people who don't have patience and skip it to the end. I hope you guys listen to this. Do leave down a comment on what you guys think of these Overtriggers listing, or is there any Overtrigger you wish to push higher or push it down lower. And like I said before, I'm entitled to my opinion based on my experience. You are entitled to your opinion as well based on your experience. So please be civil in your comment as well. And yeah, that's all I have for today. Take care of yourself, and this is McMegane signing out.